again. And I mean, really, I'd like to emphasize what Andy started off by saying there about this is a really big collaborative effort. And there's a lot of people who we need to say thank you to, and I'll come on to that in just a moment. But I think, as we kind of wrap up this project, one thing looking back and reflecting on is the size of the team that have been involved throughout this whole project. Some of them we see regularly, some of them we see much less regularly, and some of them are simply manning or staffing some control room and making sure that if something does go bad, we don't maybe look like we don't know what we're doing. So what we're going to talk about today is characterising fire behaviour to inform a fire danger rating system for Scotland. I have 20 minutes. Bruce is going to shut me up by the sounds of it after my 20 minutes is elapsed pretty strictly. So that's fine. But what I would like to encourage you to do is, if you've got questions or anything as we go through, please put them in the chat, and hopefully I can come back to them throughout at the end of the talk, throughout the question and answer session. I'm going to talk about three things that we've been up to as part of the work package that I guess you could say that Edinburgh is leading on this project. And the reason Edinburgh is leading it is because, of course, we have the fire lab. So most of the things that involve the flames and the hot stuff that's being done are led by us. But the guys at James Hutton have been instrumental in making sure that this happens in a number of ways. So we're going to start talking about flammability of fuels. That's going to be the first few minutes of the talk. We're then going to move on to fieldwork. As Andy already mentioned, the fieldwork was somewhat impacted during this project due to COVID. But rather than dwell on the negative sides of that, we managed to recently come up with a bit of a plan B to look at some interesting things in the lab. And I think that that's something that hopefully is going to add a nice kind of complement to the kind of original primary aims of the project. So here we go. I promised an acknowledgement slide. So here we are with the acknowledgement slide in no particular order other than the order that they copied and pasted off of a previous presentation. The acknowledgements here from the team in Edinburgh, so myself, but I don't really do anything. I just stand around taking photographs. The guys doing the work is Eric, Zach, Carlos, and Vasilis. They've all helped us both in the lab and in the field and with some of the firefighting. The James Hutton Institute, of course, Donald Barry has been super helpful in organising some of these fires in the field and taking on the responsibility of managing that. And I can't say thank you enough to Donald in that respect. Andy, Jason, and Debbie have all been around as well, doing various different parts of the project, but also super instrumental in the fieldwork. Michael, I'm not sure we'd get anything done without Michael cracking the whip, so thank you very much, Michael. And of course to Matt as well, over in Ohio State, for basically every time I come up with a crazy idea, telling me just how crazy it is and that probably we should do it anyway. So I'm going to jump straight into flammability, and I'm going to do a little bit of a recap here as to what I mean when I talk about flammability. One of the big challenges we've faced in this project, I think, and any multidisciplinary project faces, is getting your vocabulary sorted out in the beginning so you all know what each other is talking about. So I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. If anybody wants the presentation after, I don't really have a problem sharing it. But we've been looking at flammability from a number of points, but mostly we're looking at the ease of ignition and the energy released when something is burning. And these depend on various factors, and these factors are things that in our lab we've been trying to control when we've been measuring the flammability of different fuels. When we're looking at the first part of this, the ease of ignition, the key thing to think about is we're going to use the time to ignition. Noting that I don't have much time to talk today, I'm going to just keep this a relatively simple summary of some of the data. The time to ignition, basically the shorter the time to ignition for something to ignite, the more flammable we're going to say that is. And also the more energy that something releases as it's burning, we're going to say that has implications for how the fire will spread. So if more energy is released when something's burning, then most probably it's going to contribute more to the fire spread problem of our fuels. So I don't want to get bogged down in all the details here, but I want to just give you that kind of introduction, that kind of overview, so you kind of see where we're coming from with some of these things. And the question always is, how do you measure flammability? Because it depends on the things like the fuel structure, the fuel composition, the moisture content, how you heat it up, what kind of airflow you have around. All this becomes really difficult and really challenging to manage. So in the lab, we've got a number of ways of doing this. This is one of the images that we have. I don't need to worry about what this is. All I want you to know is that basically it's a standardized method that's used to measure the flammability of materials. You can use it to measure the flammability of natural fuels, synthetic polymers, whatever you might want to measure. There's a standardized test method that allows you to, in a controlled condition, get repeatable data that is around the flammability. And the apparatus measures the time to ignition for a known heating scenario, and it also measures the energy that's released when something is burning. So we've used apparatus like this in this project, and we've got a couple of just representative images of samples there. The top image is some heather, and the bottom image is some moss, just to give you a sense of what the samples look like when we burn them in this. And they don't look like they look in the field, that's for sure. The structure of the organism or the plant is not really preserved. Maybe for the moss it is, but probably for the heather it isn't. And of course that has a negative side, if you like, because it's not really representative, whatever representative means. But it does give us massive control and repeatability over the different materials. So when we're looking at making comparisons between the materials, we're able to do that using devices like this. Here TIG, T-I-G, and that's being presented as a function of fuel moisture content. And this is just an example graph. This is for some heather. It's for those green bits of the heather that I just showed you. And for different heating scenarios, the blue, the orange, and the yellow are progressively increasing thermal exposure. So you might think of it as a small fire through to a big fire. We can look at the response of the material and how easy it is to ignite. Now, on its own, this isn't massively helpful. What it tells you is if you've got a bigger fire, the fuel is going to ignite more quickly for a given fuel moisture content. I mean, it's not really a surprise for anybody. I don't think that one. But what we can do with data like this is we can then start synthesizing it and distilling it down a little bit and making these comparative assessments. So we can, looking here at different parts of the heather, for example, we've got the live parts of the heather, and we've got the heather, what we call the branches, so the thicker stems. You can see straight away there that the time to ignition for the heather, the live bits of small fuels, is about 69 seconds under these conditions, but it's 168 seconds for the branches. So it's a much longer time to ignition, telling us that that's much harder to ignite. Now, all of this, of course, probably is not news or a surprise to anybody. But what is interesting about it, I think, is we're then able to then tease apart the contributions of what is quite a complicated fuel structure and look at how the different elements within that fuel structure exist. So what do I mean by that? Well, we don't just have heather on its own. We don't have heather tips, heather branches, or anything like that on its own. We've got, a layer of moss and litter, and then we have some heather stems, and then maybe we've got some kind of suspended dead material in those heather stems. Then we've got some green bits of heather and some brown bits of heather, and all of this stuff somehow is contributing to how that heather is burning. And from these sorts of data, we're able to start teasing out a little bit about what fuels and what parameters that affect those fuels are changing how things burn. So one of the interesting findings here is, of course, how easy it is for the dead, dry moss to burn. I mean, I think that's not, again, coming as a surprise to anybody. That has the shortest time to ignition. It's very fine fuel, and it presents in a very open way for burning. But that's telling us something about likelihoods of ignition, and that's informing future work as to what we study and how we study the materials. The other thing I've highlighted here in blue, contribution to spread. This again is looking at the different amounts of energy that are released as something's burning. So if we stick with that dead moss example, we have a very short time to ignition, but it has the lowest energy released as it burns. So it's telling us that whilst it might be easy to ignite, it's not actually going to release that much energy, so it's probably not going to drive the fire on its own. Meanwhile, if you can contrast that with the heather branches, they've got a much longer time to ignition, so they're much harder to ignite, but once they ignite, they're releasing by far and away the most amount of energy in terms of driving the fire spread. So this is probably not actually new information to most people. If you've stood next to some heather burning, probably you've been able to notice these things and see them occurring and be able to describe what's happening. But here, what we've been focusing on is quantifying these elements of the fire behavior. And that means when we go out to the field, we know what to measure, we know what to look for, and that's kind of the next part. Oh, I skipped ahead of myself. Sorry. One of the other things we've done, and I should have flagged this up before, was based on some feedback we had from our steering group. We took a stab at trying to correlate more realistic ignition sources. So we're recognizing that we don't have these sorts of apparatus in the field. That's not how fires are starting. So we've been using a small flame ignition source. You can see it's a very sophisticated ignition source here of a candle. The good thing about the candle is as long as we keep the wick length the right length, we can get a pretty consistent flame. And what we've been able to do here is use the candle to look at the ignition of fuels. In this case, it's some millennia as a function of the moisture content. And we're able to do a probabilistic, if you like, exploration of the parameter space. So the fuel moisture content, you can see here at the top of the graph is probability of 1 of ignition, and at the bottom of the graph is the probability of 0 of ignition. And somewhere between kind of 60 and 100%, we have this kind of transitional band for where ignition may or may not occur. This again is really interesting because it's helping us understand how dry does a fuel have to be before it starts presenting a hazard. And we can of course link all of that back to the MET data and to the environmental data that we get fed in from other parts of the project. You might be wondering, why is there such a big range here? Why do we go from 60 to 100% moisture content, and somewhere in that relatively large range we have ignition? Well, that's because when we construct our little, I don't quite know how to describe it, our little bundle of millennia, how we construct it, how we hold it together, how long it's had to equilibrate in the conditioning chamber. All of these things are variables we've been looking at here, and all of them matter. So it's really difficult to get a good sense of the moisture content for ignition in any given scenario. So this was a really interesting piece that came into us from our stakeholder group. So it's a bit of work that has been really good to carry out. We've done this now for millennia and also for mosses, because as we've maybe seen from previous studies, those are the fuels that are most likely to be the first thing ignited by, for example, the discarding of a match or a cigarette or something like that. All right, moving on, because time is against me. Sorry if it's a bit of a whistle-stop presentation. I'm going to jump to our fieldwork, and the fieldwork has been by far and away the most challenging and the most fun part of this project. And the fieldwork I'm going to talk about today is stuff that we have done both at Glensoch, which is a farm owned by the James Hutton Institute, and those are burns that have been managed by Donald Barry, and those are the kind of lower cluster of dots that you can see on this map, just to the west of Glenbervie there. And then we've also got the plots that we've done with Michael up at Glentanner, so up near kind of Ballater and Aboyne, just to the south. We've got some plots that we have either earmarked for burning or have already burned in this project. So that's where we are. And as a result of that, we're very happy to have burned plenty of heather. To be clear, this image was not on a burning day. This was on a miserable pouring rain day. So we've burned plenty of heather. What we've not been able to do, unfortunately, is get out to the field and burn any grass landscapes. And I think that is probably the biggest impact in my book from COVID, and that is something that we would very much like to have been able to do. But I think in the timescales and the constraints, we're not going to get a live bit of field work on the millennia. Lots of other stuff's happened around millennia, but we've not quite got into the field. So we're very happy to have burned a lot of heather. How have we done it? Well, I think one of the key things about these projects is trying to have at least consistent data sets, or at least a baseline of consistent data. And what have we chosen for ours? Well, we've got basically two main ways of collecting data from the field. The first one is temperature measurements. We're not interested in the temperature of the fire per se. I can give you my chapter and verse on that. What we're more interested in actually is using the temperature data to get the rate of spread from the fire, using the temperature to get things like the residence time of the fire, and a little bit around the kind of flame geometry as well. We're also interested, of course, in where the fire is moving. So we've got overhead video. If you're very eagle-eyed, you'll notice that my arrow is pointing to an empty space. That's because we haven't set the camera up yet in this picture, but we have an overhead video that is looking along the length of our array of measurements. We have side video, so that's giving us a perspective in the direction of, perpendicular to the direction of fire spread. And finally, we have a kestrel here measuring our MET data, so getting some wind, some temperature, and some humidity data. Why have we chosen these things? Well, that's kind of in a way, the minimum that we think we needed to measure our variables of interest. We could measure a whole lot more, but of course, you're always trading off between flexibility of deployment, speed of deployment, number of people that you need to do things, keeping everything safe as well. So this is kind of what we got to for the variables that we were interested in measuring at this stage in the project. Our field, our region of interest, if you like, is about 10 meters in length. Some of our burns were much, much bigger than that, but the bit that we're measuring the data in is 10 meters in length. And again, that is a completely pragmatic and practical decision. Would we like to have done bigger? Yes. Could we have done bigger? Maybe, if we had a lot more of resources and people. And it's about trying to manage our research objectives with the safety on the scene and the burn objectives as well. So it's that's been I wouldn't say a challenge for the project, but it's been a decision that has, of course, impacts as we go through the project. And we've done now, depending on how you count and how many of the trials we include as good data, we have done something close to 15 of these burns, of which I would say we have 12 that are looking really nice in terms of everything working and kind of all coming together. Would we have liked more? Yes, but that's where we're at. And we have these ranging from weather conditions that were the nice kind of hot, dry period we had. The last set of burning we did was on Thursday last week. And we've got some things back in February 2020 on top of a hill on some pretty windy but pretty cold days. So we've got a reasonable range of weather conditions as well. What does the data look like? I mean, this is one of the things we've been looking at, and hopefully, if I play the video, the internet will cope with it. But we've been using the video data to get us an idea of the flame position as a function of time. So you can see our ignition here, and we get the fire spreading underneath our array of temperature measurements. See a little bit of management going on just along the flank there. So this was a pretty small fire. We cleared out, don't want to roast everything. This was one of our early burns. But you can see the images on the left-hand side. We're able to extract things like the flame front position as a function of time. And then, of course, we can get our rate of spread. We can also get flame lengths and try to begin to correlate that back to fire line intensity. So that's some of the data we've been getting with the flame spread. You can see what it looks like here. So thanks. This is some work that Carlos actually put together. And this is the chart on the left is the time from ignition and the flame front position. Each of the lines corresponds to a different position of measurement in the video analysis. On the right-hand side, you can see the actual the height and the width of the flame front. So that's giving us some idea of how deep is the flame front, how tall are the flames. So we're able to extract data like this and correlate that back to the fuel types and the weather that we had on the day of the burn. We also get some data from the fire environment. So these are our temperature data that we've been looking at. So these are just 3 of the measurement positions, and you can see things getting hot and whatnot. And I've put this in because this is data that is really interesting from our perspective, but actually quite difficult to interpret. So if you're looking at this thinking, I have no idea what this is telling me, then I guess join the club. There's quite a lot of this that we're still working through, we're still processing. But like I say, we're able to extract from these sorts of things the rate of spread and the residence time. So you can see, for example, if you look at the chart on the furthest right, 5 meters from the ignition line, in the beginning, we've got pretty low temperatures. You can see a little bit of fluctuation because of the wind and the smoke plume hitting it. Then we see that the temperatures high up start to increase at the beginning. And then as the flame spread propagates underneath, we then start to have high of the heather. So we're able to capture that the aspect of the plume dynamics and also the burning dynamics in the heather as well. So, but what's missing from all of that stuff? So this is our field work. And like I say, we've got a reasonable number of these experiments, and we're working through correlating everything to, the wind speed, the met conditions, the fire danger indices, and all this kind of stuff is what we're working through just now. But the field work is great, but it only gives you a part of the picture of what's going on. And if you're a fire scientist, the question that you always want to ask is, what is the energy released? How much energy is released, and how does that energy get released? Because the energy release is what's going to drive the fire spread, the fire behavior, and all these other things. The next question you want to ask is, how does the fire spread? Because one of the problems that I think we've uncovered from this project is, what are the relevant variables to measure if you're looking at, for example, the fuel, and you want to measure the fuel moisture? Do I need to measure the fuel moisture of every single component of the fuel? Like I mentioned before, the heather's got the brown stuff in it, the green stuff in it, some suspended fuels, has some stems and some branches. There's the moss layer underneath. It's not practical necessarily to always go and measure that and to know what those are, and to in detail characterize the response of those things. So we want to know how the fire spreads so we can target the important variables. We also want to look at the impact. This is a fire danger rating system. So the dangers we can define in a whole multitude of ways. But for example, what are the impacts to the soils? That seems like quite an important question. And also, what are the emissions from these fires? Again, looking at the danger, looking at the impacts, these seem like relevant questions that, in the context of a field experiment, are actually really difficult to answer. We've tried to measure energy release in the field, and I think we can just about do that, but only under some conditions. Looking at the impacts of the soils, again, doing that in the field, we can do it, and we have some data on that, but we haven't managed to get a good system that's reliable for it. So what we actually did as a bit of a response to COVID was we went into the lab, and I've got here a number of videos of experiments we've done in the lab. So we have about 17 different flame spread experiments in the lab, and you can see that these are not tiny fires in the lab. We definitely get some flame spread. The distance over which the fire can spread here is about 2 meters. And we can, of course, in the lab manipulate the moisture content of the heather. We can manipulate the structure of the heather, and we can also look at impacts of the moss layer independently from the heather itself. So we can get much more control over the variables effectively. So from doing these studies, this is something that kind of came out of a necessity rather than something we decided to do in the project. But what we're able to do, if I can advance my slide, is look a little bit more in detail at some of the engineering variables that are actually controlling the fire spread and whatnot. So on the left, we've got the energy release rate. So this is looking at, it's related to fire line intensity. It's not presented as fire line intensity. If you wanted to do that, you'd have to divide these numbers by 1.4 or thereabouts. But we're able to measure the energy that's released from these fires. So some of the more intense ones, we've got almost 600 kilowatts of energy being released during the flame spread. We can look at the mass loss rate, so we can look at how much fuel is actually burning. Thank you, Bruce. We can look at how much of the vegetative matter is actually being consumed by the fire, and we can correlate that to the fuel moisture and the fuel conditions. But I think from the point of view of looking at some of the impacts, I've put up here on the third plot is some heat flux data. So this is looking at the impacts of the flames. In this case, we're looking perpendicular to the flames. So we're getting the heat flux that effectively the heather is seeing in this case. So heat flux is kind of 60 kilowatts per square meter all the way up to 100 kilowatts per square meter. That's important because that links back to the testing I showed you right at the beginning. What is the right heating scenario to look at the flammability of these fuels? This gives us some information on that. And we've also got information that I haven't put on here, it just didn't really fit on the slide, around things like the carbon fluxes from this as well. So how much carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide is released from these fires. So the lab studies have been really useful for us in doing that and for linking everything back round. And that's kind of the end of where I wanted to get to. I didn't want to spend too much time on this and giving results. Those are going to be coming, I guess. They're not finalized, and there will be a report at some point that we'll be very happy to share. But I wanted to give you a flavour of what we've been doing and how we've been going about looking at some of the issues on this problem. So I guess I'll open up for questions.
Well, hopefully you can see slides and hear me. So
Yeah,
I'm new to this software. It's another one to add to my bow. With everything
we can
that's
see
going
the
on at
slides
moment.
and we can hear you, Nick.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna talk for a little bit about the project known as Pyrolife. And as you can see here, the project started at the end of October 2019. So this was our sort of first project meeting, just before we kind of realized what was actually all going to hit us sort of later on. So we did all kind of get together once. And the key person to highlight here is Catalina Stuff, who's the lead of Pyrolife. She's actually on maternity leave at the moment, so is unable to kind of to speak today. But I think what's firstly most importantly to say about Pyrolife is what it's trying to achieve and what the EU are trying to get us to achieve with what is an ITN, one of these innovative training networks. And as you see here, the aim of these training networks is to train the new generation of kind of creative, entrepreneurial, innovative, early stage researchers that are able to face current and future challenges and to convert new knowledge and ideas into products and services for economic and social benefits. And I know that's sort of a bit of a mouthful there, but the key thing I want you to get out of seeing that is that what's not mentioned there is research. So this isn't about research. This isn't the goals of this Pyrolife program. Isn't about undertaking research. It isn't about coming up with outcomes. It is about training. So the goal of this Pyrolife program is about training that new generation, training the next generation. That's what these ITNs are looking to achieve. That's not saying there's not going to be research outputs. That's an added benefit and bonus that kind of comes from this. But what we're really looking to do is to train the next generation of researchers. And we want to train those researchers, this new generation, in integrated fire management. So we want to develop the next generation of integrated fire management experts, really looking towards living with fire. So recognizing that fire is part of the landscape, part of the environment in which we live. And within this, as part of Pyrolife, that we really have these sort of 4 pillars of diversity that really kind of cut across the program. Firstly, in terms of geographic diversity. And one of the key kind of aspects we're really interested in Pyrolife is making that connection within a European context between North and South, and sharing knowledge and expertise and understanding, particularly in terms of fire, from the South in traditionally sort of fire-prone regions into the North, into those areas where fire is becoming more frequent, more kind of common part of our landscape. But also in terms of diversity, in terms of kind of cross-risk, cross-disciplinary, and recognizing that we can learn from other areas. So particularly in terms of connections between water and fire, and how we can learn about risks in terms of flooding and flooding management, and how we can link that knowledge into our understanding and perceptions of risk with fire. But also in terms of intersectorally between science and practice, and also in gender and social diversity as well. So we have these sort of different pillars that are running through the Pyrolife program. And as part of this project, it was a £4 million project, and it's with that we've got 15 sort of PhD students that come with that. And you can kind of ask questions and about what we can achieve with those 15 PhD students in terms of how we can really change that approach at a European scale in terms of living with fire, and that next generation, and really influencing the next generation of fire managers, practitioners, of policymakers, of academics across the European field. I actually like to be really kind of positive about the difference that we can achieve. I think even if we all think about, you know, how 1 or 2 people, I'm sure names come to mind of those kind of key people in the UK sense, that have really made a big difference and a big change in terms of how we've moved forward over the last few decades in terms of wildfire. And I think if we really begin to train the next generation and really get those people into key roles, we can really make a difference in terms of how we progress forward in terms of wildfire management across the UK and across Europe. And key to this is that this is taking an integrated fire management approach, just to really highlight that this isn't targeted on emergency management at all, but we are looking at the entire integrated fire management. So really considering the human, physical, ecological elements. This isn't about science, this is about engineering, it's about science, and it's about social science all coming together in a holistic framework is what we're looking to achieve and to prepare that next generation for as we move forwards. And so to do that, we need this sort of diverse consortium. And so I'm not going to kind of read through all the sort of partners that are, and beneficiaries that are part of Pyrolife, but we have this long list of beneficiaries where our PhD students are based, and then a long list and even extending list of partner organisations that link into that. And this really also builds on this core philosophy that Catalina has really been driving both prior to Pyrolife and through Pyrolife and looking hopefully beyond as well, to really recognise the importance of diversity within Pyrolife and diversity within wildfire management. And that's not just because we have an obligation to do that, a requirement to do that, a legal obligation to do that, and it's also just because it's the right thing to do, but also because if we are taking this holistic approach, we really need to listen to and get knowledge and understanding from all the different voices that can be within the room, all the different experiences, all the different knowledge bases. Only by actually bringing together all these different this different understanding can we actually progress forward with the most appropriate solutions to these sort of wicked challenges that we're facing within wildfire management. But really at the heart of Pyrolife, the sort of soul of Pyrolife, is the ESRs, so the early stage researchers or the PhD students. So these are scattered across these beneficiary institutions across the EU, and these really are the backbone working with Pyrolife. They started really in the middle of the pandemic, so started in April last year, so they're a year into their projects at the moment. So these projects are really just sort of starting to get going at the moment. And as part of this, we have the PhDs, we have the research, but we also have a core components of training that go along that connect between these different PhD programs. And I'm not going to go into the detail of all the training here. The two that I really just wanted to highlight were down the bottom here, both in terms of the international conference that took place in 2020. If you didn't have a chance to sort of join in on that online conference, and also the monthly Pyrolife webinars that are taking place at the moment. And the reason I wanted to highlight those is because if you didn't get a chance to join in with the International Symposium, then one of the few benefits of COVID is that this is all online, it's all on YouTube. So if you do actually want to delve into a whole seminar series on wildfire, then in the broadest kind of context, then just type Pyrolife into YouTube, and then you can sit down to your heart's content, because there's hours and hours of entertainment on there already for you. And if that's not enough for you as well, we have the free webinar series that's continuing. So it's organized the last Wednesday of every month. So there's one coming up this Wednesday as well. All the details are there. And if you want to log in and register, then please just go onto the Pyrolife website, and then you can sort of join into these webinars taking place each month. So there's a huge host of training that takes place throughout the sort of the 4 years of these PhD programs, really developing that holistic approach to fire management, as well as the diving into the detail of these ESRs and their individual PhD projects. The PhD projects themselves are really developed around 3 work packages looking at risk quantification, risk reduction, and also in terms of risk communication. And I haven't got time to kind of delve into the detail of all of these now, but I just wanted to list the diverse range of sort of PhD topics that we're focusing on as part of the Pyrolife project. So within the work package 1, in terms of risk quantification, we've got projects looking at understanding the perceptions of wildfire risks, of temperate fire danger rating, of the fire behaviour in temperate European fires, the drivers and behaviours of megafires, the impacts of fires, so looking at carbon and water quality, and also in terms of the economic impact as well of fires. Then looking in terms of work package 2 and looking at risk reduction, this is then looking at elements of the home ignition zone, so looking at how we can improve building design and building structures, how we can improve the design and management of the wildland-urban interface, and particularly with the focus on vegetation. We have the design of fire-resilient landscapes, but also how we can begin to think about making fire prevention enticing, and also thinking about fire resilience and governance as well. So you start to see the broad scope that we're looking at in terms of what we're looking to address through Pyrolife. And then in work package 3, we've got in terms of risk communication, we've got that transdisciplinary cross-risk fire research, European interagency exchanges, engaging with communities at risk, and also about inclusive risk communication as well. So it's a huge range of topics, and recognizing that each one of those is an individual PhD, a 4-year project, diving into that particular topic area in a huge amount of detail. And so what I wanted to do today was to try and give you a flavour of some of those topic areas that I thought were most relevant to the sort of the meeting and those people that are going to be attending today. So what we've got is 3 of the ESRs that are going to dive a little bit into a little bit more detail about their particular PhD of interest. So we've got Kerryn, who's going to just talk for a little bit about temperate European fire danger rating. Then I've also got Mario, who's going to follow on and talk a little bit about fire behaviour and his project in temperate northwestern Europe. And then we've got Abbey that's going to talk a little bit very quickly about environmental impacts and looking at the fire effects on carbon flows and water quality, just to kind of give you a bit of a taste and a flavour of those PhDs that I thought align most closely with the sort of discussions of today. So in a sense, we're going to hand over first to Kerryn before Mario, and then to Abbey. To try and keep things a little bit more straightforward, I'm going to try and keep the slide going. So we're going to have a bit of a Chris Whitty kind of next slide, please, coming from everyone. So if I hand over to Kerryn and just sort of shout at me when you want to progress on to the next slide, and we can start with looking at fire danger within northwestern Europe.
That's great, thanks Nick. So hi everyone, my name's Kerryn, and my Pyrolife research is looking at the landscape drivers of fuel moisture content variation and their importance for fire danger and fire behaviour. I thought I'd talk just a little bit about my current fieldwork to quantify the range of variation in live and dead fuel moisture across a landscape, and how that's going to inform questions of the importance of accounting for this when predicting wildfire behaviour. Next slide please, Nick. So as you all know, fuel moisture content varies across a wide range of scales. At large scales, climate and fuel type are those main drivers of the variation, and you'll hear a bit today about the work that's going on to do that across the whole of the UK. But fuel moisture content also varies at much smaller scales, and I'm hoping to supplement the work that's been done by the Scottish and UK fire danger rating system groups by zooming in on a targeted landscape case study. So by holding the climate region and the fuel type constant, I'm hoping to disentangle the landscape drivers of fuel moisture variability that often get masked at that regional scale. Which brings me to one of the reasons why this is important. Fire danger ratings are generally developed at that regional scale, and basically I want to know, is it important that we account for the variability that exists as you move across a landscape? So if it's not significant, then that's a good thing. We can continue with what we're doing. But if it turns out that fuel moisture content varies significantly at these smaller scales, then it presents an opportunity to understand what controls this variation and consider how can we incorporate these relationships to create functional fire danger ratings and fire behaviour models. So in my field research, I've selected sample sites based on what I think are the hypothesized important drivers of fuel moisture at this scale. So different hill slope positions and soil textures, together representing differences in drainage, as well as a north versus south aspects and canopy density. Next slide, please. I've selected these sites within the North York Moors, a landscape that has capacity for wildfire, a dry climate, and has variability in soil, topography, and also canopy coverage, given that it is a highly managed landscape. And we've just collected 3 sets of samples at the 36 different sites over last week's dry period, and that coincided with the National Park Authority announcing a fire alert for the moors. Next slide, please. At each site, I'm sampling 7 layers of Calluna vulgaris. These are grouped based on Davies and Legg's paper that ran a factor analysis to identify the key layers of heather that explain fuel moisture variation. That sampling is going to be carried out during periods of interest for fire danger throughout the fire season this year and potentially next year. And although the specific layers might be different, the protocol for sampling and lab work is the same as that used by the Scottish and the UK fire danger rating system groups. And that was important to me so that my results will be comparable to other work that's going on across the UK. Last slide, please. So this fieldwork is going to underpin the second half of my PhD, which will look at how we can use this knowledge to develop indices and fire behaviour models for UK fuel types that are capable of accounting for some of this landscape complexity. And that's really what I want to get out of this research. There's an interesting scientific question, and addressing it, what can we then do with this knowledge to further efforts to develop wildfire management practices in the UK? So thanks for listening to my brief overview. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to send me an email. I'd be really happy to have a chat.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So we'll keep questions to the end, and we'll jump on to Mario if you want to talk to your slides.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Mario Tapia, and I'm the early stage researcher working on the subject of fire behavior in temperate Northwest Europe. I'm carrying out my research as part of the TechnoSylva team. TechnoSylva is an environmental engineering consultancy which develops software for wildfire planning and operational response, and they're based in Leon, Spain. My project was subject to some delay, so I began a month ago, so this will be a bit short and sweet, but I'm excited to share a bit of my research plan. First off, I would like to clarify my study area. By Northwest Europe, I'll be mainly focusing on this Atlantic bioregion, or the countries of Ireland, the UK, Netherlands, and Belgium, as well as parts of Germany, Denmark, and northern France. And the goal for my research is to, 1, characterize fire behavior in Northwest European ecosystems, 2, assess whether drivers of fire behavior are meaningfully different to other regions, in particular Southern Europe, and 3, assess the potential to model Northwest European fire behavior using existing fire behavior models, and ultimately to make improvements needed for applications in research and firefighting. Next slide, please. Second change. Yeah, activities within the project will involve collecting geospatial data on fire behavior, such as rate of spread, fire intensity, fire perimeter, etc., as well as on influential environmental variables such as weather, topography, and in particular fuels. With this data, I'll simulate past fires with the well-known fire spread models to assess the accuracy in a temperate ecosystem. And with sufficient simulations, the idea is to analyze the history of spread patterns to identify the driving trends as well as the influential local weather conditions to see if they're meaningfully different in this region. Next slide, please. And my ongoing work involves using NASA VERS hotspots to identify fire events throughout Northwest Europe. For those not familiar with VERS, the VERS hotspots refers to the NASA active fire product, which captures thermal anomalies on Earth's surface. And by clustering these individual hotspots in space and time, we can develop clusters representative for fire events. My hope is that with sufficient numbers, we can identify and analyze trends for the rate of spread for fires in these regions. The work is still in the preliminary stages, and so there's some difficulties regarding the detection of small fires, but it's still looking promising. Anyway, this is just an early step, and I'm always on the lookout for further sources of field fire behavior data in the hope that I can simulate some previous fire events. Data about fire behavior and fuel moisture in particular have been really evasive, and I welcome any potential idea for sources or references that I can check out. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mario. And then last but certainly not least for today, we've then got Abbey.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Abbey Marcotte, and my host institution is Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So, as my title said, my study is about spatio-temporal effects on soil and water quality, and I will just try to give a really quick overview of everything. But in short, I have 4 research sites, which you can see in the graph, and they each serve as individual case studies for my project. So 3 of them are in Europe, and then there is 1 site in the United States. And each site varies in their spatial and temporal scale, like what I'll study. So for example, my site in the Netherlands is a point level study, and it's about 1 fire in particular. And then on the other extreme, my study in the US investigates multiple catchments over multiple timescales. And the exact objective will depend on each particular study site and their characteristics, but in general, the goal is to identify dominant soil and water contaminants of concern, and also like the pathways of contamination after a fire event. Next slide, please. So right now, I'm currently doing research on the Deurne fire in the Netherlands. So it's a raised peat bog system and a Natura 2000 site. So there's a lot of restoration efforts going on for just nature conservation in general, but mainly for peat regrowth and the sphagnum moss growth. And then last year there was a fire that started in April and it lasted till June. And the flaming phase wasn't too bad, so to say. It just lasted a few days, but then there was really severe smoldering and it was difficult to extinguish, and that lasted for roughly 2 months or so. And so the State Forestry Organization of the Netherlands, they were concerned about the fire impacts on the area in general, but especially about the amount of ash that was produced from the smoldering, and then the risk of ash contamination on the peat layers and the canals. Next slide, please. Yeah, so last summer I did fieldwork there to determine the smoldering patterns and the locations. And then I took a lot of peat samples all throughout the area, and the depth was ranging from 0 to 20 centimeters, just to see if there was a trend in the depth profile of the peat. And then I also took ash samples if they were present, and then the main objective was to measure the pH of the peat samples and ash samples to see if there was a difference in the acidity or the alkalinity of those samples within the smoldered and non-smoldered locations. So I'm still processing that data, and hopefully I will have some cool conclusions soon. And then my other goal, depending, well, not yet, but no worries. But yeah, I don't know. It just depends on what the pH data says, but might also do some sort of geostatistics to see if there's correlations between like other landscape characteristics. Now, next slide, Nick. Thanks. Yeah, and last but not least, I have unfortunately, it's a virtual research visit with the University of Birmingham. But I just started working with Nick there, and for the next several months, I will be doing some work on the Saddleworth Moor fire from 2018 to determine the impacts on the drinking water quality. So I'll likely mainly be looking at the heavy metal contaminations and the hysteresis of that within the catchment. So that was a really fast summary of my project, and thanks a lot for your time. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Right, hopefully you can all see the slides okay. Yep, brilliant. Okay, welcome everyone this morning. Good to see so many familiar faces and some new faces as well. So it's great to be able to be speaking to you today. This is a bit of an update from the NERC-funded UK FGRS projects, and I think as Andy kind of talked about at the very beginning of the session, this is an opportunity for the various different FGRS projects to provide a bit of an update on activities, and also to kind of bring in other teams and other speakers to give a kind of bit of a where we are at the moment with wildfire research in the UK and further afield. So it's kind of today's a bit of an opportunity for our project to kind of give everybody in the wildfire community a bit of an update on what we've been doing. So as you can see, this is on behalf of a much larger project, not just a larger team. Sorry, it's not just myself. Various members on the team are on the call today, so I may throw to them as and when. But you can find out more about the project via our project website and via our Twitter accounts if you're not already following that. So just a bit of a kind of a reminder, or a bit of an opener really for those perhaps who aren't familiar with the project. This is the project aim is to establish and test the scientific underpinning and key components required to build an effective, tailored UK fire danger rating system for use in establishing the likelihood and impact of current and future fire regimes. Well, that's at least what we set out to do when we proposed this project. And this is very much what we are doing. And again, this kind of echoes what's going on in the Scottish project led out of James Hutton Institute as well. So both projects are working very much towards that final kind of similar end goal. So a few of the kind of headline things before I kind of go into the actual updates. This is an ongoing project. We started officially back in 2020, and the project runs until the end of 2023. Although, like the various projects and updates we've had so far, things have been were severely impacted last year, obviously, due to COVID. So we will be putting in for an extension, again, like Jason and Andy have done on theirs as well. So we will hopefully be extending our activities beyond the end of 2023. It's a large project. It's a big investment in wildfire research across the UK and across the various different institutions. So it does kind of pull together expertise from 7 different research institutions, and brings together a large kind of staff team as well. So it really is quite a large investment, as I said, for research. So again, if you've not been to our website, you're not familiar with the work that's going on, please do go and have a look at it on the project website. So in terms of a few kind of updates, in terms of where we are, we've got 4 new colleagues have joined the project this year. So Ray has joined us as a research technician at the University of Exeter. Alice, again, also joined us as a research technician back in February at the University of Birmingham. And then at the start of April, we had 2 postdoctoral research associates, Anna Maria and Tadas, who both joined us at the University of Manchester and Swansea University, respectively. And Anna Maria is on the call today as well. So we've got a kind of a new injection of energy into the project. So we're now up to full staff complement. We'll talk a little bit more about the activities that those colleagues will be contributing to in a few slides' time. Much of our field work and lab work has restarted. Again, a bit like the Scottish project, we've been able to kind of move forward now that kind of immediate lockdowns and shutdowns in 2020 have now kind of eased off a little bit. So we are kind of very much getting on top of that. And Kerryn has already kind of mentioned some of the ongoing field work that she's been doing, as well as others across the wider project. One of the big tasks at the moment we're kind of endeavouring to do is kind of look at some of the data sharing agreements and getting lots of data sets compiled. So again, echoing some of the thoughts and ideas of previous speakers around fire statistics, for example, Earth observation or Earth observation derived data sets, for example, like land cover data sets and others. Because that's going to feed into a lot of the work that goes on in terms of our kind of fuel mapping exercises in 2021. And also members of the team and indeed members across the wildfire community have been contributing to other activities such as the climate change risk assessment, and Claire Belcher was the lead on that. So various kind of activities at the back end of 2020 and into 2021. And in terms of actual projects and what we'll be kind of introducing and kind of updating you on today are a couple of the specific work packages. But again, just a bit of a reminder, and maybe for those who are not familiar with the project, a bit of an introduction to what we're trying to do in this project. So as you can see on the slide, this is kind of how our various work packages fit together. These are the blue work packages labelled work package 1 to 6. Very much thinking about the biophysical elements of fire danger. So thinking about fuels and flammability. We've heard from Rory already about the importance of understanding flammability. Fuel moisture, again, we've echoed that already previously. Building towards things like work package 4 about fire behaviour, and that's where some of the work that Tadas at Swansea will be coming in to work on. And at the same time, looking at things like the fire statistics across the UK, so building on the work that's already gone before, and also in conjunction with ongoing projects elsewhere in the country. And I'll come back to that later on. But I don't want to spend too much time going through the ins and outs of each of the different work packages. What I want to focus on a little bit are two of the work packages where we've got some kind of initial results, initial data, which will be really interesting to see your thoughts on. And to kind of see and very much hopefully see the connections emerging between the various different projects. So firstly, we're going to be looking at fuel moisture in work package 2, and then looking at some of the findings and work going on in work package 3 as well. I should say that there's the rest of this diagram, which I always kind of like to include, those elements of building towards, say, fire risk assessment, so factoring in vulnerability and impacts and those kind of things, are outside the scope of this project, but certainly it's a discussion point that we should all take forward about how we can develop research activities and kind of collective activities across the wildfire research community. Okay, so work package 2. This is the fuel moisture regime characterization work package, and this is led out of Birmingham, so Nick Ketteridge, and who's on the call today. Nick, I might kind of come to you in a second for any kind of further additional comments and stuff. But this essentially, the root of this is to understand that really complicated spatio-temporal dynamics of fuel moisture across all of our major fuel types, from both the plot scale right the way up to the landscape scale, such as Kerryn so eloquently mentioned earlier on. And that's going to be grounded in a lot of field work over the next year or so. Year or two, for example, and Alice Orpin at Birmingham is kind of taking the lead on that and has been running up and down various different established field sites so far, but also will be extending that further in due course. And that will then build us towards, in time, kind of, can we use this field-derived data, can we collate that field-derived data to generate new fuel moisture models? So very much bringing on kind of artificial intelligence in terms of what's the word I'm looking for? Nick, help me out here. Random. What's the gone for a brain fart there?
Do you mean forest?
Random forest regression models. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah. So to try and generate these new fuel moisture models. So that's where it will be going in time, and in a couple of years' time, about a year's time, in fact, we'll be recruiting a postdoc to work on that modelling side of things towards the end of the project. So that's kind of where the project is going in terms of its ambition. In terms of where we are currently, we have this kind of experimental design across the UK. dividing it up into climatic regions, soil textural types, and land cover types. So I don't know if Nick, do you want to jump in here and maybe explain where the thinking is with this and where we can kind of take things going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, as sort of Kerryn's really touched on, there's a huge array of different kind of controls on, or likely controls on fuel moisture content that happen at a range of different scales. And so what we're trying to do here is just pull apart what we consider to be the kind of the key controls at that kind of national scale, and what we and the number of controls that we could actually manageably begin to look at. And so what we started to pull across are basically these 3 dimensions of controls, looking at the control of climate, the control of soils, and also the control of land cover type, and to see how these 3 controls actually interact with one another to influence or potentially influence the moisture content, the fuel moisture content across the UK. So in a sense, our sampling regime is looking at these, trying to maximize variability across these sort of 3 axes, and then looking at the vegetation covers within, or key vegetation covers within these different sampling sites.
Brilliant. Cheers, Nick. And again, the kind of the classic fuels that we've been talking about already earlier on today, so the heathers, the Molinias, but also things like gorse and brackens and other key fuel types across the UK. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of the kind of the research design in terms of where we are currently in terms of bringing sites online. A lot of this has been restricted by kind of travel time from the University of Birmingham and the kind of the constraints that we see. But as things relax even further and things ease off, we'll be bringing online further sites across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So again, Nick, I don't know if you want to jump in there and kind of add any further detail.
No, I mean, ultimately what we've got are sort of 5 regions that match sort of 5 of the climatic regions, predominantly across England, but also sort of hitting into sort of South Wales as well. And within each of those, we're then looking at those different land cover types and the different soil types to try and maximize the variability within that. We really want to try and link across to the Scottish site, and so we've started sort of initial conversations about linking to that and having fuel monitoring taking place within the regions where you've been undertaking kind of experiments to date, and even the potential of having a sort of a part-time sort of technician actually held up with it to undertake those measurements. So we're really looking at expanding this further northwards as well, because we recognise at the moment, purely based on logistics, we are kind of targeted to a certain extent around Birmingham at the moment. But we really want to directly make that connection in terms of fuel moisture between the UK project and the Scottish project.
Excellent. So that's where we're going to be going in the next few months and years. And excitingly, preliminary data from the sites. And again, I'm going to throw it back to Nick again, if that's all right, just to kind of speak to some of that. And I think hopefully that kind of nicely echoes what's come before in earlier presentations.
I haven't really got a huge amount very little to say about the actual data itself, because this literally has sort of just been sort of emailed to me, and I sort of put the box plot together. Ultimately here, what you can really just see is the different vegetation types that we are sampling. So again, which kind of maps onto what you saw with kind of Kerryn. So where we're looking at kind of landscape up to the kind of country scale, we're looking at discretizing our vegetation in a very similar way, which hopefully links into the way it's been discretized within the Scottish sites as well. And all you've got there is just the very preliminary data from the first sort of few kind of rounds of sampling that Alice has been doing, where you can see there the gravimetric moisture contents of the different components of the fuel across the areas of the UK that we've been sort of studying to date. So that's sort of up to sort of 4 rounds of sampling that Alice has done over the last sort of few weeks at these sort of different sites, trying to make the most of the dry weather where possible.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nick. I'll stop calling on you now. Okay, so we'll just move on now, just to kind of hopefully dovetail dovetails quite nicely with Rory's work earlier on, and this is on the flammability side of things. This has been led out of the University of Exeter, so Claire Belcher in the wildfire lab down there. So again, very similar kind of questions and deliverables. And we've got some kind of, again, in a similar fashion, preliminary findings that I'm going to throw up on the screen. But if people want to follow up with Claire in more detail, I encourage you to do so. So this is just a couple of slides that Claire pulled together for me today, and this is on behalf of the wider wildfire lab team as well. They can't make it today. They're currently burning different things in a different environment and couldn't make it out of that. But they do send their warm wishes and happy to answer any questions you may have. So one of the activities that the wildfire team, the Exeter team have been looking at, along with other colleagues as well, has been both the lab-based work, but also field investigations of recent fire events. So looking at the Wareham forest fire of a year or so ago now, looking at the kind of the fire spread and wind direction to do some kind of forensic reconstruction of kind of fire behaviour on the site by looking at those kind of micro variations in burn impacts on trees and in the landscape itself. And the intention with some of this data is to combine it with Earth observation and other data sets collected at the time, such as the meteorology, to try and use this as a case study for kind of fire behaviour modelling. And again, some of the work that Tom Smith and Tadas and Swansea team will be doing to look at this is to try and pull this together as a really kind of interesting multidisciplinary case study to try and look at fire behaviour in this kind of this kind of setting. So again, we'll be working on that over the coming months, and hopefully we'll produce some kind of report in due course. One of the other things that we did last year, and this was kind of where a lot of the wildfire community came together, was to provide heather samples collected across a similar week, or the same week in August last year. We put a bit of a shout out amongst the fire and rescue services, but also land managers, agencies and the like, to send in samples of heather to assess the various kind of various different factors and measurements that we can make on this. And this is in addition to kind of the lab-based work, things like the work that Rory's been doing and Claire's been doing down Exeter, and the experimental work. And this is kind of opportunistic sampling, so additional data on top of the kind of the structured work to try and get that variety and that variability in values from, in inverted commas, real-world settings. We were provided samples from across England and Wales. We unfortunately didn't get anything from Scotland at the time. But what we will be doing is rolling this out again in future months and in future years. So again, if you've got the capacity to collect samples for us and send them down to Exeter, please do get in touch with Claire and the Exeter team, and we can send you out the protocol and the kind of the sampling approach to feed some of that data into us. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on this, but we've got some plots on the screen there, very similar in many respects to some of the work that Rory was presenting earlier on. So some of those key metrics: time to ignition, peak heat release rate. It's not easy to say without your teeth in. And some of those similar kind of relationships. So again, as we start to unpack some of this data and start to work some of this data up, I'm hopeful, given the similar the kind of experimental and measurement techniques, we can kind of pool the resources between both the Scottish project and the NERC-funded UK project. So again, just some kind of summary statistics there for that variety from the different geographical regions for those values, such as time to ignition, peak heat release, and the like. So the final part, just to kind of emphasize, is that we have various different work packages on the project, but obviously all the different work packages need to speak to each other very clearly and very cleanly. So some of the work going on between these two different work packages, work package 2 and work package 3 clearly have linkages together. So the fuel moisture work and the flammability work. So both Birmingham and Exeter are kind of working in partnership to kind of situate some of the monitoring sites for both the fuel moisture and some of the kind of flammability testing as well. So we've got these kind of overlapping synergies between the various different aspects of the work. So again, similar kind of monitoring for particular parameters, as well as some intensive monitoring on sites closer to Exeter. So for example, in Devon and Dorset, again, driven by kind of practicalities in that respect. Okay. So I'll stop trying to talk about colleagues' data, and if you want to ask any specific questions about some of those initial data, or if you want to find out more about their measurement protocols, do get in touch with the teams there. The details are all available via the project website. If you can't find their email address, just let me know, and I can put you in touch. So what's next in terms of 2021? Well, we're obviously going to continue our field and lab work across the various work packages, and including some experimental burns in due course. So it was very interesting to hear about Rory's experiences earlier on, and very much be good to kind of catch up with you to find out what worked well as those lessons learned about what didn't work so well, to see again where we can kind of make sure we're working on similar strategies. One of the main tasks here at Manchester over the next year is to kind of work up and work on the UK fuel map. So Anna Maria's first tasks in starting at Manchester is working alongside Gail and others, including others on the team, including James Morrison, I think is still on the call as well, at Forest Research, to be integrating our various different land cover maps, national forest inventories, all these various different kind of earth obs and ground-based data sets to develop these kind of fuel maps, which are so fundamental to an FDRS. Another piece of work that's been going on, and we're hopeful that this will report later in the summer or into the early autumn, is a piece of work that Mark Hardiman and one of his MRes students has been working on, looking at the historical, thanks Simon for the heads up, some of the historical fire hotspots, looking at the past several thousand years. It's a different scale entirely, but give us some kind of gridded hotspots which we can use to compare to modern and recent fire activities. And again, that hopefully gives us some added value to some of the broader questions that we're interrogating within the project itself. And then on top of that, we've mentioned things like the recent fire events for fire behaviour case studies, as well as working on some of the UK fire statistics. And again, this is going to be important because it not only connects into the kind of the broader questions that we've been talking about already today about fire statistics, but it connects to projects in Scotland that the Scottish Government have funded, and also ongoing work within the respective government departments as well. So again, there's lots of activity ongoing or in the pipeline. So do kind of pay attention to the project website for updates, and we'll kind of keep everyone updated through the various different networks over the next few months and years. Okay, so I think that's my time with a little crying emoji. Happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I was asked really just to give you an overview of, it's another NERC project that I've been involved in, looking at the impact of a fire. There was a fire up in Forcenard, up in the Flow country, a couple of years ago. We're measuring the CO2 fluxes over the bog up there. So this is a quick introduction to what my measurements actually are. It's eddy covariance method that we're using, which quantifies the rate of exchange of a trace gas using very fast sensors over the surface, and it gives you an aerial, an estimate over, depends how tall your tower is, but maybe sort of 300 meters, 400 meters squared area. As I say, depends on your fetch and things like that. So it's a little bit, it gives you more of a landscape picture rather than just doing chamber measurements, which I think has been used in the past a lot for CO2 over these kind of landscapes. But anyway, we have 4 sites up here in the far north of Scotland, in Forcenard, which is Caithness and Sutherland. Thurso's just up sort of northeast of where we are, and be measuring CO2 exchange up there at 4 different sites that are different stages of restoration of the peat bog from forestry to trying to get it back to peatland. We've got a reference site where there's been no afforestation, and then some different ones here that are different ages. And then Dyke, which is the one of interest, was forested up until the end of 2017. So we measured up there over the forest. We had a tall tower, and then after they harvested, we went back in, and so at the end of 2018, we put back in the tower. This has actually got methane on it as well. So we're measuring methane and CO2 fluxes over this bit of harvested plantation. That's the mass there up on the edge. So it's not a huge fetch. It's only about 100, 200 meters, but we've got some data from that. But then what happened is we got everything back in, and then in 2018 we had 2019 there was a fire started further north from our site, but it burnt right the way down into the reserve and over onto this. The plantation had been harvested, but there was still a lot of brash lying around, and the fires came right the way down here and got within just a few meters of our flux tower, which was a little bit scary because we had a whole load of methane, not methane, fuel cells with methanol and things sitting at the base of the tower for powering it and things. So yeah, I was actually on holiday at the time and just got messages and photos of all this going on, but it all survived. And after that, we got an ERC emergency, I can't remember exactly they call them, but an ERC rapid response kind of grant to look at the drivers of the greenhouse gas emissions at this site, because we could look at the harvested area that hadn't burnt, and then obviously this burnt area. So we looked at putting in another flux tower over the area that had been burnt and looking at how the fire impacted on the restoration efforts for the CO for the peatland. So we got the tower in, sorry, that's just an aerial photo showing. So that's where we put the new tower. This is our existing one down here. And with the wind direction, we're essentially measuring over this bit here and this bit here at the unburnt area. And we got the tower in at the end of 2019 in September, and it all looked quite good. We had it all set up, and it was, both the towers seemed to be running away quite fine. And then we sort of had a bit of some trials and tribulations with it all, with equipment, and then the pandemic. As I say, we set it up in September 2019. October, we moved the old tower and made it a little bit shorter, so it was getting a better picture of the fetch. But then we realized that the new tower, that some of the equipment wasn't working properly. And eventually, well, in February, I went up. That was my last trip I managed to get up before the pandemic, and I managed to replace some of the instruments there, and it all seemed to be okay. And then, of course, and for the summer last year, we'd planned all these tasks and things and to get things working well. And then we realized something else wasn't working properly. But of course, this is all during the pandemic, and getting up from Aberdeen, going up to Forcenard, it just it basically meant that a lot of we haven't had both towers running properly, everything working at the same time, overlapping for any extended period. So the project's not worked too well from that point of view. Thankfully, as of this month, we seem to have both of them running properly now. And this is the same with many other projects. We have got an extension to keep it running a bit to try and get some data out of it. But we have got some measurements which were kind of interesting. The top one here is the old, well, not the old tower, the original tower that's over the unburnt area, and this is the bottom ones over the burnt bit of harvested peat, and you can see where it's not been burnt over the vegetated bit. There's a lot more dynamics. This is just the CO2 concentration rather than flux, because we didn't have the flux data for these periods. You can see the CO2 concentrations varying a lot more than it does where it's burnt, basically showing us that there's more active vegetation there doing more exchange of the CO2. And again, this is this concentration measurements from last year, and you can see the unburnt mass. There's a lot more dynamic variation in the CO2, and over the burnt area, it's not doing so much at all. We've got some periods where there's we've got soil sensors and various met sensors there, trying to look at the energy balance, which is basically the water vapor flux and the sensible heat flux over the surface, two surfaces, to see what the differences are. And this is just looking at soil temperature on the left there and air temperature on the right. And we can see that there's some differences in the dynamics, again, of the two, where the fire occurred. The soil seems to be slightly warmer most of the time, and this is the air temperature, and there's a lot more variation over the burnt area as well. But sorry, just to conclude, this is a very quick. It was a roller coaster of an experiment, and this is a very quick overview of it. But it's been a bit up and down, but there are signs of interesting differences between the sites, and we're starting to get the data in now to actually examine the processes more, and we're hoping to be able to salvage a few months of full data from it all. I think there was a few lessons for us learned in terms of just things I should have known for the decades that I've been doing this, that checking everything's working before you leave the site, but sometimes you think everything's working and then it's not. One of the issues we've had is getting remote telemetry installed so that we can actually check on things when we're not there. And when it comes to your field experiments, just think, what if, and include wacky ideas like pandemics and lockdowns. I don't think we anticipated any of that. Nobody did. But sorry, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry if that was a bit brief, and if there's any question, I mean, there are potentially, it's interesting seeing what you guys are doing. Fire is not something that I've really worked with, worked in the past. But if anybody's interested in getting any data and things from Forest and Ard, I'd be quite happy to collaborate on things.